In a story focused on conflict, heroic characters are only as good as the villains they get to deal with. In the case of really fantastic villains, their popularity may even eclipse that of the hero. And while that has arguably occurred at numerous points in One Piece, there have also been moments where major antagonists have been so incredibly disappointing and failed to provide a challenge worthy of our protagonist to rise to. So it's time to name and shame these pitiful characters. Welcome to the top 5 worst villains in One Piece. Number 5. Starting off this list, we have the only person who is not a captain of his own crew. It is Diamante. Diamante is one of the top 3 officers of the Don Quixote pirates, led by the fairly amazing villain in contrast, Doflamingo. Along with Doflamingo himself, Diamante was built up to be an incredibly strong villain. The difference is that Diamante did not live up to the hype. As the hero of the Corridor Coliseum, he seemed overly confident in a battle royale whose combatants included Jesus Burgess and a man who was thought to be Monkey D. Luffy. In retrospect, if that battle royale had been allowed to finish, he would have been completely wiped out. This guy just isn't anywhere near as strong as his position in the story would dictate. He ended up being defeated by Kyrios in one hit and then knocked out on a piece of wood. Now let's be fair, Kyrios is a strong guy. But he does only have one leg, and up until that day, he'd spent the last 10 years living as a literal toy soldier. Yeah, I think Diamante could have done a bit better. To cap it off, he has an equally as lame devil fruit that allows him to transform himself and objects into flags. Yep, that's flags. It gets used relatively interestingly, but everything about this guy is a disappointment. The only reason he isn't higher on the list is because he isn't the leader of his particular group, and there are some pretty disappointing leaders coming up in the list. Speaking of, number 4. Wapol. Now I'd like to start this off by saying that the Drum Island arc was pretty fantastic. Chopper's story is one of the great heartbreaking highlights of the series. However, that is despite Wapol. As a villain, this guy just sucks. From the moment we meet him, to the moment he was beaten, he never presented any sort of legitimate threat. He was just there, and he needed to not be there, which Luffy promptly made happen by blasting him away. The one thing that does make him somewhat interesting is his devil fruit, the Baku Baku no Mi. This essentially turns him into an omnivore, allowing him to eat literally anything and then become or incorporate that particular thing into his body. It's a very potentially powerful fruit, I think, but it just gets used for comedy, really. And that reason is why Wapol appears so early on this list. He's actually surprisingly funny. As soon as he left the series as a main villain and started a cover story chronicling his journey to become a rich and successful toy manufacturer, I love the guy. In the end, he was so successful that he even got to marry Miss Universe. And that is how Wapol is best enjoyed, in very, very small doses. As a minor side character, he's wonderful. As a villain, not at all. Number 3. Moving on to a very early villain in the series, we have Captain Kuro of the Black Cat Pirates. Kuro is apparently the second most intelligent man to be born in East Blue, hailed as a master strategist and an accomplished combatant. So yeah, it all sounds pretty good so far, so why is this guy on the worst list? Well, primarily because his master plan involved him becoming a butler for 3 years, a role which he loathed every second of, only to be faced with a mutiny by his own crew and a defeat at the hands of 3 rookie pirates and a boy with a slingshot. I think that if this guy hadn't been stated to be both a mastermind and a deadly fighter, then I wouldn't be so harsh on Kuro, but everything he was built up to be turned out to be absolute garbage. His plan was awful, and his fighting ability was only apt enough to deal with the weaklings that he himself decided to build his crew with. With that aside, he did have an alright design with some awesome character traits, and that's his only real saving grace here. It's just that the second most intelligent man in East Blue? I mean, the second most, right behind Ben Beckman. You know, that Ben Beckman, a commander in the crew of one of the 4 Emperors of the Sea, and a name taken seriously even by Admirals of the Marines. Kuro is just so extraordinarily disappointing in comparison, and unlike most villains, he's never been seen in the series again since his defeat. Some villains come back stronger, more intelligent, funnier, or as allies to the Straw Hat Pirates, and it really redeems their characters. This guy just disappeared, and that's probably for the best. Number 2. Gecko Moria. So every now and then in the series, you come across a character that you just don't instantly bond with. usually due to some kind of aesthetic choice made by Oda. Of course, as soon as you see these characters in action, those initial feelings are dispelled, and they just become awesome. Gecko Moria is not one of these characters. Serving as the least interesting of the 7 warlords of the sea, Moria came into conflict with the Straw Hats when they arrived on his island ship of Thriller Bark. His whole theme is cheesy horror, and while he's recognized as a warlord of the sea, he almost never fights on his own, preferring the shadows created and stolen by his devil fruit power to do so for him. So while most characters with questionable designs get some really good action, he doesn't. He just sits and stands sometimes. To his credit, the one time he does fight on his own, he transforms into an ultimate form for a pretty cool boss battle. But other than that, this guy is just... He has no real dreams or ambitions, although he did have a fairly cool plan to zombify Oars, one of the strongest creatures in One Piece, even going so far as to put Luffy's shadow in the creature. So Oars ended up being pretty cool, but Moria still didn't. I mean, this guy is so lame that after the Paramount War, the world government even recognized that he was too weak to be a warlord of the sea and attempted to assassinate him. He did end up escaping, and I'm hoping that he gets some sort of amazing redemption. But until then, this guy is one of the worst villains the series has ever seen, especially for his position. In fact, there's really only one villain I can think of that is worse than him. Number 1. Hody Jones. The Great Big Bad of Fishman Island. This was the first main villain faced by the Straw Hats after the time skip and the first big test of their new abilities. Well, not big test I guess? Not even. I mean, is it really a test if you know all the answers and then just rip up the paper, throw it in the bin? Yeah, Hody Jones was worthless. I think it speaks volumes when a villain is defeated in his home territory by Zoro in a single slash halfway through the arc. Hody Jones never had a chance. Even after his pill-popping power-up, he still got wrecked by Luffy. I don't even think he would have posed a threat pre-time skip. And here's the greatest part, even if his mad plan had been successful, it still would have had the side effect of rapidly aging him and his entire crew from the abuse of energy steroids. The only thing moderately interesting about his character is his motivation, which turns out is blatant racism. In the end, both he and his crew become so overzealous that their racism seems more like raw instinct rather than actually having any reason to be racist. So while it's a good social commentary, he's a weak villain, poorly motivated, and even if he was successful, he practically kills himself for no real outcome. Well played, Hody Jones. Well played. And that's what puts you at the number 1 worst villain in One Piece, now and always. And that about does it for the top 5 worst villains in One Piece. Please feel free to comment with your own worst villains, and I'll see you next time for another One Piece Top 5.